Hi, welcome to our podcast. I'm Mary Abazia, and of course, with me is Sean Wellen, who's having a birthday, and Tom Spitali. And we're also
Happy birthday,
celebrating.
Sean. Thank you.
We're also celebrating that we have done over 100 podcasts. How we've hung out that long together is crazy. But anyway, what we love to do is see real things that are happening out in the world, either through the news or with our clients, and then break them down and figure out what's really working or sometimes what's really making it a disaster. In this case, we kind of fell in love, and we've fallen in love for a long time with Barnes and Noble, but they seem to have just a whole new stride to them. And we wanted to figure out how they're able to survive in the face of Amazon being such a big competitor. So Tom, why don't you kick us off and talk a little bit more about Barnes and Noble? And they're by the way, they're opening 30 stores in 2023. So they're on a growth path.
Yeah, they've shifted the narrative a little bit. Many bookstores have been defeated by the juggernaut that is Amazon, as they came along as world's biggest bookstore. And of course, that was the original Amazon intent. Over the course of Amazon's first decade or so, just made it very difficult for many bookstores to compete. One of the things that we like to talk about, though, that Barnes and Noble did early on was that they recognized through gathering research that it was a huge insight. People look at book shopping as a form of entertainment. The data that Barnes and Noble had was that people were spending a long time, like 3 times longer in their bookstores than they did in other retail establishments. And many would have taken that information as a finding that it was an inefficient experience in the bookstores. But Barnes and Noble did what we always advocate, which is they kept asking why. And they discovered that book shopping was a form of entertainment. They put in the books, the coffee shops, and they have been able to weather the storm of Amazon. And not only weather the storm, but with this latest information, Mary, how many stores did you say they're opening?
30. They're opening 30 in 2023.
30 bricks and mortar stores, which is a huge triumph for that company and for their staying power.
Yeah, by the way, that was in 1971 when Leonardo Ruggiero had bought just the name and had the Fifth Avenue store. And by having that insight, he grew to be one of the world's largest bookstores. But then in 2019, they got bought by a hedge fund because they, had kind of gone up and down. So, and Sean, they have a very famous CEO that over there across the pond. Do you want to talk a little bit about their new CEO?
The business that took over is actually owned by venture capitalists now. The original CEO, I don't believe, is part of the business, but Waterstones was a very similar business to Barnes and Noble. And it was started by a staffer from W.H. Smith, which is a famous retailer of stationery and magazines and books that you see in many airports. And he had a vision to create this more focused environment of a library, almost bookstore, and it didn't work. To cut a long story short, he took his redundancy check, started his store with his vision, subsequently sold it back to W.H. Smith for about $47 million. So it was a good return on his redundancy investment. And they've always had that sort of similar approach to Barnes and Noble, and since they've been bought by venture capital and then they've now merged or taken over Barnes and Noble, they've become a much bigger global entity. But I think to me the key to this is, and it comes down to those people that have worked with us know that we're always trying to find the benefit sword. What is it that customers truly look for? And of course it's choice and it's convenience and all those things where Amazon win hands down. But there's an element of, particularly with books and also with music, which is browsing. There's something enjoyable about browsing a bookstore because you'll walk through and you'll see books that you might not have come across before because they're on display or in certain parts of the bookstore. And you can take a moment to have a a read, tangible. You're holding it. You can look at the chapters and see what's covered. You can maybe flip it over and read the reviews. It's a very visual experience, and that is what you can't do online. Yeah, they can serve recommendations, and sure, you can look for a particular book by name or a genre, but you can't have that joy of just handling and browsing and just picking stuff up. It's how we used to buy music back in the day, sitting at those bins with the LP records in, flicking through, pulling out and seeing what was what, maybe going onto the headphones and having a listen, whatever they were featuring. That environment of exposing yourself to the content that you want to buy isn't easily replicated elsewhere. And I think that's the other point of this, is there's always a segment of the market that's going to be underserved by the market leader because of their specific needs. And I think that's the beauty of Barnes and Noble and businesses like Waterstones. They figured out that there's a sufficient market there for people that they don't want fast commerce. They want slow consideration and browsing. As Tom said, it's a form of entertainment, or somewhere to go while your kids are getting new school shoes. It's just, that was my oasis. I'd run off there.
Yeah, I think a lot of times when we push people in our B2B workshops to go beyond benefits and move to the top of the benefits ladder and find out what are some of the emotions that customers have, a lot of times they think it's, you know, a waste of time, especially in B2B, where they think there's not a lot of emotion. And another thing that people have difficulty with, even if they really get into the exercise and they find a list of values that that exist in the minds and hearts of their customers, they don't really know what to do with it. And this is like such an interesting case, because what Barnes and Nobles did was they figured out this emotion of entertainment. You know, book shopping is a form of entertainment. And they went to another tool that we often work with our clients on, which we call the concentric circles, or the value proposition format, where you start looking at the core product, augmented products, services, and information as a way to say, how can I differentiate my offer, whether it's the actual product itself or the packaging or the services or the information. And this is a direct line from discovering a emotion, entertainment, and looking at the services rung around there and going, oh, well, here is where we can differentiate, because everybody's got the same books. And frankly, really hard to compete on the basis of price with a company like Amazon. And so not only does everybody have the same books, but likely Amazon has lower prices. But here's a way that we can take this emotion of entertainment value and create an environment that is truly different from the Amazon experience. So it's a direct line between two steps in our process that can lead you to differentiate in a market that seems pretty straightforward, right? The distribution and selling of books.
Yeah. What I think that the CEO did most remarkably recently is that it's a form of segmentation. He allows the bookstores to serve local taste. And that's why a lot of the independents that didn't go out of business survived, is that they would cater to the needs of the local. So not only were they looking at customer needs, but somebody in Texas may have very different needs than somebody in Los Angeles. And so he's giving them the flexibility to design the stores and feature things that are appropriate for that market, which hadn't been done before. It was like a cookie cutter. And I think that gives them legs to be able to survive as they continue. So, Sean, what were you saying?
I was thinking that another good strategic question to ask yourself, in particular, if you're facing a truly dominant competitor, is they've achieved their dominance clearly by focusing on some pretty important elements of their offer, whether it's distribution, whether it's supply chain and cost out. Whoever your massive competitor is, they've probably been doing something right. So a good question to ask is obviously not how can we compete head to head. You really can't. But what have they left behind? What did they sacrifice in order to create their better offer for the vast majority of customers? Who's been left behind? What gaps have been left in the market? That niche approach has worked in every industry and market. There's usually a way of not thinking, how can I be like Amazon, but how can I have this counterpoint to what they do and say, and major on that, but be the exact opposite in many ways, or at least fill the gap that they must have left behind. Look for those gaps. That's often well worth your time to explore.
We wrote about it in the book, the original Accidental Marketer book. By the way, if you're listening to this, we're getting ready to release number 2 case studies, the second in a series of the Accidental Marketer books that features a lot of case studies. But one of the things that we talked about when we were talking about differentiation in the original book was this thing that Sean's talking about. We call it the opposite good, the opposite good. And what it means is whatever that behemoth or big competitor owns or does for the marketplace, there typically is something that's opposite, that's good, you know. So Amazon calls itself the world's biggest bookstore, right? So, you know, you've got massive selection, everything that you could ever want. You know, what's the opposite of that? I mean, you know, what's the opposite of being colossal and big? And it really is kind of being the non-antiseptic, you know, version of a bookstore. The ability to relax and to feel human and to sit down and have a coffee and like Mary said, you know, maybe even though Amazon's got the world's biggest bookstore, maybe even find something local that you know that's not available elsewhere. I don't know, but the idea here being that you can always find an opposite good to whatever is owned by the big competitor in the market. The opposite of big is also sometimes fast. You know, people can think about a competitor that's huge and they think, yeah, but they're probably slow because they're big, you know.
Adidas did that with Nike. I mean, to your point, Nike was, you know, they had all the endorsements and they were growing, and Adidas was 5th or lower, and they just thought there's a group of people that are kind of put off by this. And so, you know, as both Sean and Tom are saying, they appealed to people by saying endorsed by no one. And it's like, finally, you know, it's the real people again. And that moved them up to number 3 and maybe even 2 in some markets. So they just did the opposite good for Nike, and it worked incredibly well for them for a while.
Yeah, it's that old saying, you can't please all of the people all of the time. And it's true of any business. You can't please every customer all of the time. You're always going to leave something behind. And part of the art of following in the footsteps of a giant is to find those pockets that have been left behind and tailor your offer to meet them. And even though Barnes & Noble are a lot bigger than you might think of a traditional niche being, I'm sure in terms of global sales, they're very minor. But in terms of an actual business, they're very significant. So don't confuse niche with the scraps off the table. There's often some pretty meaty opportunities that just can't be catered for. In the terms of the bookshop, there's the experience, the sensory experience, you know, the calmness, the decor, the smell of a bookstore, the tangibility of holding things. You can't do any of those things online. They're not important to everybody or even to many, but they are to some. And that's always the key, is finding out what is it that they literally can't provide. And then either because there is a market already for it, or if you feel like really pushing the boat out, create a market, remind people that this is something that you're missing. Create a need, we call that, which is harder to do, but it gives you options in terms of your strategic vision.
We talk a lot about. Pardon? Oh, are we out of
You're Tom. Normally it's me that gets the shepherd's crook around the neck saying "Time's out" by Mary, but she's
Last
picked on you
comment,
today.
yeah.
I'm just enjoying this moment. Tom's been told to wrap up. He's got the wrap up sign at the Oscars. The microphone's going to start coming down. So.
being dragged off the stage? I guess what I was just going to say is that we're talking today about a very traditional and very mature business, book selling, and we do a lot of work with companies that are in mature markets. And one of our specialties is to do just what we're talking about here. Is you take a series of our tools, and not all of those usage of those tools leads to new opportunities, but 100% of the time, if you go through the litany of tools, you find opportunities to differentiate mature products, even in businesses as old as bookstores are. You might use influence mapping to find a new stakeholder in your B2B business, or segmentation to reveal a segment that doesn't like endorsements or whatever, like Mary was talking about, to mix our B2C and B2B metaphors.
Mary's going to cut your mic soon, Tom. I'm just warning you.
We find, I'm going to just keep going until she does. We find values and relating to services, new values that nobody's catering to and leading to services. This is kind of what we do in a workshop that helps companies that have very mature products to differentiate themselves. I'm done.
Good. Thank you. Yeah, so visit your local Barnes and Nobles soon, hopefully, and support their amazing business. And hopefully you have a few ideas for your business. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.